Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Last time zero waste designer Birgitta Helmersson spoke to me for Check Your Thread, she hinted at an exciting project in the works that she couldn't disclose at the time. Well, turns out that exciting secret project was writing a book. It's called Zero Waste Patterns, it's fantastic and it's available now. It employs the concept of blocks, which can be transformed and manipulated to make a whole host of zero-waste garments. It's a big development in the world of zero-waste sewing, and today's episode is a conversation with Birgitta as she tells us all about how and why she created it. But first, I want to know how you're doing this week. I hope this episode finds you well and happy. Thanks so much to everyone who left some feedback on last week's episode. That was the introduction to garment fabrics. Colour Joy Lynn on Instagram left a comment saying, "This episode is brilliant. I don't know how you did such a great job in such a concise and short amount of time." Thank you so much for that. It really made my day. Thanks also to those of you who responded to my query on whether you'd like a downloadable resource version of the episode. Enough of you said yes to make me think that it'll be worth my while putting it together. So I'll get on that this week and I'll let you know when it's available. So have you been doing any making recently? I've embarked on a selfish sewing project, which is actually using only scraps and leftovers. I want to hoover up as many of my slinky woven scraps, by which I mean like viscose and tencel scraps, as possible. I'm going to piece them together using a similar patchworking method that I used for my patchwork denim quilted jacket. So far, I've gathered them all up and I've made sure they're all pre-washed. Like tencel and viscose tend to shrink a bit when they're washed, so I want to make sure that the different fabrics won't shrink at different rates when they've been combined together. Then after that, I ironed them all and I've trimmed a lot of them into rectangles and then I've started piecing them together. I do that by picking two rectangles that have an edge of about the same length. I'm stitching them together and then I'm overlocking the raw edges and then pressing the seam down. Then I either add a third rectangle to that pair or I put two pairs together and the shapes grow. So that's where I'm at the moment. Sustainability-wise this week, it's been all about acquiring and discarding kids' clothes as responsibly as possible. As I mentioned last week, I recently scored my daughter a couple of jackets on Vinted. And this week, I was able to hook both my kids up with heaps of second-hand school uniform items from the school's uniform sale. You might recall that previously, I helped sort out and sell the second-hand school uniform items. More recently, the school itself have decided to take on the selling of the second-hand school clothes. Although I like to think that they thought that it was possible because of all the sorting and organising that I did last year. Anyhow, the important thing is that all those clothes are accessible for families to buy. I also had a big sort out of my daughter's wardrobe last week. I bagged up all the items and made sure it ended up in the hands of a family with two younger girls who were really grateful for all the clothing. It's always better, if you can, to donate clothing directly to people who you know will use it, rather than sending it off to the already overstuffed charity shops and thrift stores. Especially the items that have a tiny flaw, you know. For example, one of the items that I passed on was a pair of denim dungaree shorts, and it had a tiny felt tip mark that I couldn't remove. The mum that I donated them to didn't care at all because she knows that's what happens to kids' clothes. But I wonder if they would have been scrapped if I'd sent them to a charity shop, you know. So this week I am saying a huge thanks to new patron Lena for signing up to support the podcast via Patreon. I also get to say a massive thanks to existing patron Megan for choosing to up the amount of their support as well. Big thanks to both of you. If you want to help keep the good ship Check Your Thread afloat, please find the link to do so in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. You can sign up to make monthly donations of any amount that you like, but roughly the price of a cup of coffee is a popular amount. This podcast is run entirely on caffeine, so that's pretty suitable. You really will be helping make it possible for me to continue to make this podcast. So if you can offer your support, it would be incredible. So back to today's episode. Birgitta has been on this podcast previously. Those were episodes 54 and 55. And that was where she spoke all about her incredibly interesting career journey and how she works to create the amazing zero waste garments and patterns that she sells. I'd definitely recommend checking those out before listening to this one as a useful bit of background. Anyways, a lot of you who have already listened to those episodes cite them as some of your very favourites, so I know you're going to get a lot from this one also. So remember, all the links to all the things we discuss are in the show notes. Have a great week, take care of yourself, and enjoy. So how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's been a pretty good year, actually. Yeah, I feel positive and good this year. Last year was, great, but really, really hard. And so I feel like, we went back to Australia for the first time in 5 years over Christmas. So that was a huge deal for all of us, really, because it'd been so long and we have so much family there, and my partner's whole family is there, and lots of cousins and lots of, things like that.
Yeah,
so
how long did you go for?
We were there for 6 weeks.
Nice.
And it was very overwhelming, actually, because it was the first time we went back since moving here, and also since COVID and everything. So, had this long period of not even being able to get into Australia, which was super weird. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I've just noticed you've got a book out.
Yes, well, that did happen too.
That's the thing. Yeah. So first, I'm of course going to recommend that listeners go back, if they haven't already, and listen to the first 2 episodes of Check Your Thread that you were on, which was number 54 and 55. So those were a deep dive into your whole journey towards zero waste and your career. And we also got into the design process that you work on, and a lot of the challenges as well related to that. So Pete's going to listen to that.
When did we do that one? What year was that? Was it last year or was it the year before? 2022?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure we could easily look back.
Because they was at episodes 54 and 55, and the episode you're going to be on is going to be 98.
Wow.
So almost half a podcast ago.
Yeah.
You've got to come back every 50 episodes.
Exactly.
Cool. So congratulations on your book, because you were
so
sneakily hinting about it at the end of our last conversation.
Yes, exactly. That's why I was asking. I thought, well, I must have been writing the book when we had the last podcast. But of course, I couldn't really talk about it.
No.
And that was really, really hard.
It must have been. I've got this thing. It's massive. It's taking over my life.
Exactly. Because it does. It's pretty much all consuming. For anyone that's written a book, I'm sure you'll agree. So it really was taking over everything, and also just creatively as well, because I felt like, I had so many new ideas going into the book, and then so in every other aspect of my work, I was quite creatively dry. It was difficult for me to come up with other ideas on top of what was happening in the book for new patterns. And
so, first of all, could you please describe to people who haven't seen your book yet, what they will discover if they pick it up?
So, my book, called Zero Waste Patterns, it's a book of 20 projects to sew your own wardrobe using zero waste pattern cutting. And so basically the book is based on 5 core patterns, which we're calling blocks. So there's a tee, a singlet, a trouser, a shirt and a skirt. And these are quite minimal, simple shapes that come in quite a wide range of sizes. And then from there, there's a further 15 projects. And so you basically can use these core patterns to make small changes and adjustments and, mix and match them.
Yeah, you can even combine them, can't you?
Yeah, and so that's basically the whole concept of the book, is to sort of learn these core patterns first and then use those, you can go wild with it and make your own, designs too.
Because you could use it as a starting point for your own and go somewhere else
Exactly,
as well.
And that's really my whole, that's really what I wanted to do with this book, yeah.
So how did it come about? Was it an idea that you had brewing and then you kind of pitched it around, or did somebody approach you?
I was actually approached by my now publisher. It was what was last year, 2022. So towards the end of 2021, initially, I think I had these ideas in my head. I just didn't realize that it would become a book.
Interesting.
But I definitely, once this happened and we started talking, and they thought it would be a really interesting idea for a book, to use, zero waste patterns. And my now editor, she had seen some friends of hers, making garments from my patterns, and that it started popping up, and then she looked into my work, and that's when she got in touch. So, but I think straight away I knew what I wanted to do. It just hasn't been done yet, with zero waste patterns. I mean, I think now there's more and more information out there and so many different patterns you can try as well. But when I first started, I mean, there was almost nothing to sort of look at. I guess because where I started with pattern making myself is that I learned how to make blocks. And, you make a bodice, a skirt, a sleeve, a trouser. And then you kind of save those blocks and you use those then to design anything you're going to do. You always have that as a starting point. And I didn't feel like there was anything like that for zero waste patterns. And also, I think it's so easy to overcomplicate zero waste patterns. And I really wanted to come up with these very kind of simple shapes that are still kind of timeless and easy to change and adjust. And so I think that I already had that kind of floating in my head. So when I was approached, I thought, okay, well, this will be perfect. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Like, this is the chance to get that idea out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so cool. In a way, it's almost like you're bridging the two worlds of pattern cutting in a way. Isn't it? Like the traditional, you start with a block, you adapt them, blah, 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 and the zero waste approach. You're kind of like bringing them together in a way.
And of course, I mean, the method of adjusting a zero waste pattern or changing it is very, very different to the more conventional sort of pattern making methods. But my background is initially with more conventional pattern making, and that's how I first learned. And I talk about this, in the introduction of my book as well. But I mean, when I first learned how to make a pattern, I made a block for my own measurements, and then that was sort of a few weeks of figuring that out. I was going to this small school, and then, after that, then we started learning how to manipulate that pattern and move the darts and add gathers and, all sorts of things. And it was so liberating. I felt so excited by it. I thought I really wanted to do something like that, but with zero waste patterns.
Amazing. Well, you've achieved it. It's incredible.
Thank
you.
So
what was it like? You were saying like it was really tough to it was very all-consuming, like making the book, because you've got lots of other elements in your life and in your business, haven't you? Like, how did you juggle all of that?
So I think the biggest thing was being very, very organised. I think I can't say I've always been very organised, actually. It's taken me many, many years. I've had my business now for 10 years, 5 years in Australia, 5 years here. So it's taken me about that long. But no, I'm actually getting a lot better at being organised in general with work. My life revolves around lists. Every day I will look through my list and I'll add and remove and, reorganise.
Yeah.
The list is never empty. It's just that it morphs into different things.
Does a lot of it roll over to the next day or the next week?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it rolls continuously forever if you want it to. And there's, priority sections, and there's, more like long-term ideas sections, and there's, but so I do like to be very, very organised. And what I've learned from also doing the patterns in the last bunch of years too is that things take a lot longer than you expect. And I think also when I pitched the idea and then they approved it, then I had actually quite a good sort of schedule. You don't hand everything in at once. It's like, okay, at this month we want this part, and this month we want this part. So I was able to sort of work through that.
Stops it being too overwhelming, I guess, as well.
And you really got to do like a little bit every day, because, I mean, if you don't, it's so much work. A lot of the patterns are totally new, even though I had the ideas in my head. And when I have ideas for new patterns, the shapes and the layouts also kind of float slightly in my head if I can kind of imagine in my head how it would be, but I hadn't tested all of them. And I honestly wasn't even sure if it was possible. But I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted, a shirt and a tee and a pant and, all of those kind of core shapes. But I wasn't sure how they would look yet and if they would really be as I had imagined them. So there was a lot of testing, a lot of prototyping, testing sizes, testing fabric widths. Yeah, it was a process.
Yeah. So also, it is such a beautifully designed book as well. Like, how much input did you have in like the whole look of it?
So I had a lot of references and things that I sent of what I wanted, but I think that we were so well aligned in our vision for it aesthetically. Nice. And I think when I also, my publisher, which is Quadrille, before, we went through the whole pitching and everything, and before we actually signed the contract, I looked into them and saw what they'd done before and saw their aesthetic and style, and I felt like it was sort of the perfect match. So I feel like right from the beginning it was very aligned. And in terms of the actual layout and design of the book, I was happy with the first concept they sent me, basically. So, and it was so amazing. I've always had to do almost everything myself, and I am quite particular, I think, because of that. So I remember many years ago, I'd be like, I might just send this off to a graphic designer because I want someone else's vision, and, I think they could do it better than how I am doing it. And then they would send it back and it wasn't what I imagined, and there would be this like back and forth, and I'm like, I'm just going to do it myself. So that's happened a lot. I mean, it's probably just because I'm just micromanaging or whatever, and I'm just used to doing everything myself. I'm sure there were great ideas, but I was like, no, it's not what I want.
Yeah.
So, but what was really, really brilliant with this process was that I had help for that. It's like I've never had those kind of resources available to me. We had an amazing designer, Emily, and she just really got me, and she knew exactly how it should look, and she really helped to make the layout so clear and concise. Like, that's been a real struggle with my own patterns, and I try to make it as clear as possible, but I'm not a graphic designer. She just really knew how to do that well. So I'm really happy with how that all came together.
Yeah. I mean, it does look like your house style. It does look like an extension of your website and your patterns. That's what I really love about it. I feel like it's really me, but yeah, I had so much help in being able to put that together because, that's a huge job, in itself. So yes. I was really relieved when, that was really great to be able to get, and just to be able to bounce ideas off of them, and, we can work together on things, and yeah, that was a really great experience. Yeah. Amazing. And what about the photography? I was quite surprised to see you in it, actually.
Oh, I know. That was their idea. But, I thought, well, I guess it makes sense. And in a way, I mean, the book in a way is kind of feels to me quite personal because it is, in a way, it's like up to this point, it is a bit like my life's work, I would say, it professionally. So it sort of felt like, okay, well, maybe it's good if I am in it too. And yeah, a couple of the models are my friends, and a couple of really great people that we've used as well before as models in our online shoots, and everyone was local within Malmö. So
it looks like a lovely sunny day that day.
I know. It was beautiful. We actually took the photos at my family's farm.
Cool.
So that was quite special.
That's really
too.
personal.
Yeah, so that was that was really personal. And this is a place that I used to visit as a child, and it's been in my family for maybe 4 generations at least. It's really nice to be able to go back and visit it, and it's got a lot of memories for me. So that was super special as well to be able to do that.
That's so nice. Yeah. So who was the photographer? Is it somebody that you'd worked with before?
So my publisher sent me some ideas of photographers. So they had a few people in mind, and I just looked through their work, and I went with Emli Bendixon, who was so amazing, and I loved working with her. And I find that when I choose photographers, I often choose someone that's not really a fashion photographer. So Emily does a lot of like beautiful sort of food photography and, photography of, I guess, like people's workspaces and really lovely kind of natural shots. And then some of the other photographers that I looked at that they sent, they were great as well, but it was a bit more like fashion based.
A bit more styled.
Yeah, and I mean,
yeah.
it wasn't like, I don't know, Vogue magazine vibe. It was very natural still. It was really, really nice.
Okay.
But I was like, no, I'm going to go with the one that's as far away from the fashion out of all of those. And I just really loved her vibe.
Well, they came off amazingly.
Yeah, I was so happy with all of it. And yeah, it was just also really nice, I think, to have some nature in there, because it just gave it some life, especially when it's so heavy with instructions and templates and...
Yeah, that's a nice contrast. So back to the projects in the book.
Yes.
So what's your favourite? Do you have a favourite?
Yeah, so I think my favourites would probably have to be the vintage shirt and the quilted jacket. Personally, I really love just the aesthetic of those, and the quilted jacket as well. I really loved working on that because it's sort of patching together different pieces, and that one was quite special because we actually had some offcuts from doing some of the other pieces in the vintage fabric, so we actually used those offcuts in the quilted jacket.
Oh, cool.
And so that was a way of also incorporating everything somehow into, you know, the samples and the pieces that we were doing.
Yeah. So when did the book come out?
So it was released, well, in Australia it was April sometime, and I don't know why they had it a bit earlier, and then the rest of the world was late May.
So it's been out for a bit now.
Yes.
So have you been seeing like projects popping up on Instagram and stuff?
I've seen a lot of people actually, maybe because in Europe it's, you know, summer, a lot of people making the singlet and dress.
It suddenly got very, very hot,
Yes,
actually,
it
in
did.
kind of
It was
late May,
like
June.
Instant, you know, 1 week to the next you're wearing like strappy dresses, and yeah, exactly. So I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of people actually making the shorts, and they look great. So yeah, it's really, I love seeing how other people interpret the patterns, and
it must be so gratifying.
It's really great. It's really, really nice to see. And, you know, just because everyone has their own way of doing it, and that's something I also have really loved with doing the sewing patterns that we do. You know, it's like, it just really brings me so much joy seeing how people use the patterns and the way that they make it their own.
I recently saw a lovely listener of Check Your Thread called Heina Rangi, who made a gorgeous version of the singlet. It just looked so sweet and simple and just so crisp.
Yeah,
and just
that's so nice.
It's exactly what you want to wear when it's hot.
Yeah.
And I also saw previous guest Liz Hayward,
yes,
another zero waste pattern designer.
She did a blog post actually on the shirt. Yeah, it looked great.
That shirt was so good. I was immediately like, I want to make that right this second. And yeah, and the blog post was really, really good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was fantastic.
That actually kind of got me thinking, actually, because I think Liz was saying that this is the first zero waste pattern that she'd made. The first one of yours. I can't remember. It was something along those lines. Yeah. At the moment, like the zero waste pattern world, it's relatively small, isn't it?
Yeah,
still, compared
definitely.
to like the whole indie pattern world. And that kind of got me thinking, like, do you think that like different zero waste designers have almost like different signature approaches or solutions to certain problems?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, especially because there's not so much out there yet to kind of research and look into, you really got to come up with your own ways of doing the finishes and things like that. It's quite hard to get that right, and you've got to be quite creative in how you do it, because you can't just always use more traditional ways of doing things. You've got to think outside the square a bit. So I definitely think it's led to there being different techniques and methods and ways of doing things for sure with different designers.
Yeah, I'm imagining that when you see another zero waste pattern, you can almost like read it and interpret it in a way that like just regular sewers can't, and you can maybe be like really appreciate some of that, the solutions that they've come up with. Like, that's really clever.
Definitely, because you kind of see it and then you take the shape and you're like, okay, and that goes around. Yeah, nice. You know, it is. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're super busy, but do you get time to like check out what's going on in the rest of the zero waste pattern world?
You know, I mean, I definitely see what I see what comes up. I follow a lot of different zero waste designers and pattern makers online, and there's a really great zero waste design collective as well, which have been doing amazing work in bringing together, a library of designs and things that other people can use as references, and so they're really, really fantastic. But I think with my own designs, I think because when I started, over 10 years ago, there wasn't really anything for me to go by. So I feel like now when I do come up with new ideas, I very rarely use other people's patterns or look at other people's patterns. I think I'm also a little bit in the back of my mind afraid of being too influenced by it, because in a way, sometimes I think with a zero waste design, there's certain things where it can only go one way in the end. So once you see it, it's like, okay, it's difficult to not almost copy it. And so I really want to try and come up with my own original ways of doing things as much as possible. But I think this actually, compared to 10 years ago, I mean, there's so much amazing stuff out there now and amazing resources compared to, you know, before. And I think if I was starting now, I would absolutely be using other people's designs and seeing how they're doing it, and just like gathering all this information and trying to, you know, and then making it my own, you know, because there's so much you can look at now. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really exciting, isn't it?
It is. It's really, really exciting to see.
So I got a couple of questions to put to you that have been submitted by the Check Your Thread newsletter subscribers. The first is from Danielle. So Danielle would like to hear more about how zero waste patterns can work for larger sizes.
Yes.
So Danielle said, I live in Australia where wide fabrics are harder to come by, and I feel that this is a barrier to zero waste sewing patterns for me when I'm a size 18 to 20. As sizing often depends on a wider fabric width. Daniel's saying, I already have the book. It seems harder to make suggested adjustments required to create the patterns lengthwise rather than across.
Yeah.
So what Danielle is referring to there is how the cutting layouts for some of the projects in larger sizes, they are suggesting that you position the pieces on like
the opposite direction,
perpendicular to the grain.
Yeah, I know. I always find it so hard to explain how to, but yes, it's going
that
the other way. Yes.
So I think Danielle is concerned that when you're doing this, some fabrics might stretch or might stretch over time, or do you know what I mean? Like not be as robust as if you're cutting it on the grain. So do you have any tips or advice for cutting out some of the larger sizes, particularly when the sizes are exceeding the width that they're able to get hold of?
Firstly, I would say that it depends greatly on the fabric that you're using. We actually use our patterns going that direction for many sizes, not just extended larger sizes, depending on the fabric widths that we have to work with, depending on the patterns we're using and the design layouts we're doing. And
so you've got a lot of experience of positioning things.
And so it really depends on the fabric. For example, we have a fabric we use a lot here that's this really lovely organic cotton shirting. It's sort of, I don't know if it's a poplin, but it's like quite structured, but it's quite lightweight at the same time. And it's only 120 centimetres wide. So we often use that going the other direction. And that one's great because it doesn't have a lot of mechanical stretch going, would you say widthways? Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with the mechanical stretch. I think also being worried about garments bagging out and that kind of thing, that's mainly relevant to fitted garments. So if you've got pressure and pushing on, you know, say like tight jeans and the knees are pushing, you're going to get some stretch and movement there. So, yeah, it really depends a lot on the fabric.
So maybe avoid fabrics that are very loosely woven.
Exactly. Don't get anything, for example, that has a bit of stretch in it. I think for me, the issue that I sometimes have with cutting the other direction is it doesn't fall in the same way. I'm not so concerned about it stretching or bagging out, but it's more that sometimes it can be a little bit stiffer. It doesn't have the same kind of drape, but again, it depends a lot on the fabric you're doing. It depends on, so this is more specifically, say, if I'm making something with gathers, and sometimes cutting the other way, sometimes certain linens, more kind of thicker structured linens can fall a little bit differently. But then you can also use that to your advantage if you want that look, because it can be a slightly puffier look. I used to do a lot of work with costume, like theatre and things, and I made some tutus, and there's certain ways that you cut the direction of the tulle to get different types of effects. And it's kind of the same, I guess, with fabric. Like if you want to have a really stiff, you know, tutu, then you cut it a particular direction as opposed to a softer falling tutu would be cut the other way. So that's just an example, you know, more extreme example, because that's a very stiff structured sort of shapes. But I really don't think it's an issue doing that, as, you know, cutting the other way, as long as your fabric allows for it. But I can also recommend, I mean, and this is the whole sort of concept with the book, that you learn the core shapes and the particular size that your size garment fits into, and then you can figure out how to lay that on your fabric. So, for example, if you're doing a trouser and you're doing the trouser in, say, the 4XL or 5XL, so you want to cut the traditional way down the fabric, cut 2 legs down and then 2 legs below, and then you'll have space running down the other side, and you can cut a second garment there, like a shirt or a top. So it's about figuring out, other layouts that work for you, because of course everything with zero waste pattern cutting is dependent on the fabric width, size you're using. Every time we cut a new design, we're always just quickly scribbling out new layouts because it changes a little bit every single time.
Sure. Yeah. If you want that on the grain thing, think of it, it's going to be minimal waste rather than zero waste.
And you could use the offcut, because I think even if you do have offcuts, sometimes because you've got to cut, say, a particular rectangle size or square size, then those offcuts are they're straight edged, and so they're easier to incorporate into other projects, I think, than having all these little bitty, curves and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Okay, I've got another question. Okay. This is from subscriber Nikki. So Nikki says, I am intrigued by zero waste patterns, but haven't tried any yet because they often seem very voluminous and unfitted. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's Nikki has a different style. So my question for Birgitta would be, are there any tips for improving the fit of zero waste garments while maintaining zero waste, especially for a larger bust?
So I guess what you're talking about is improving the fit as in making it more fitted.
That's what I interpreted that to mean,
So I would say, for me personally, I don't like to design zero waste patterns that are super fitted, but the book has many shapes in it that are not what you would think like a typical zero waste garment would be. Many of our previous designs that I've done, like the gather dress and the crop shirt, they are oversized, and personally I really love that aesthetic, and I know lots of other people do as well. But if it's not your cup of tea, then I would go for a different design, But in the book, the trouser, is a much more kind of fitted shape at the top. The singlet as well, even though it isn't fitted around the waist and everything, it is very nicely fitted under the arm. And
yes, because it's got bust darts.
So it's definitely possible to do more fitted garments. If you want to go for something that is much more fitted and figure hugging, then there are other designers that do patterns like that, but they can be very complex sometimes. Or, I think that they can be amazing. It's so clever to see how the pieces kind of slot together and everything, but they are relatively advanced sometimes, I think. So it depends a bit on your sewing skill level as well. But in terms of, say, making simple adjustments, so for myself, I actually have quite a large bust myself, and so often I will put a dart in the side. Even with an oversized garment, it makes quite a big difference because you have less kind of fabric and kind of bunching going down the side, and even if it's oversized, it makes a huge difference in just how it sits and falls. So there's a dart that we do in the zero waste soft blouse, which is one of the patterns that we have. And that's a dart that's basically just, you would measure from your shoulder down to roughly where you want the dart, and then add around 5 centimeters because the shoulder seam sits a bit back on that garment. And then it's just basically like adding maybe 3 to 6 centimeters on the side, and then bringing a straight dart across into the front. It's hard to explain. What's going to happen is if you keep the shape exactly the same, but you add a dart into the side seams of the front bodice at the positioning that you like, but they need to be totally horizontal. That's going this way, right? Yes. So they can't be on an angle because that'll change the shape of your side seam too much. So totally straight. Basically, that just lifts that excess fabric out of the front. It means your back is going to be a little bit longer. So you'll need to either cut away that strip and use it as a facing somewhere, or find a way to incorporate it into your garment. But if anyone who owns the soft blouse, you can see how easy it is to do. Yeah, and it does make a really nice shape for especially someone that has a slightly bigger bust. And
doing kind of like fisheye darts, either kind of below the bust, or do you know what I mean? Like the darts that look like...
Oh, yeah.
Almost like a kite.
Down here. Yeah, you could definitely do that.
And sometimes on the back as well, if you just wanted to bring it in a little bit.
Yeah,
just
for sure.
To taper
it just
the shape
depends
slightly.
on, because the thing with darts, and they really change the shape of all those edges. So with more conventional pattern making, when you're adding darts and everything, you often have to kind of smooth off the lines and the shapes along the waist and the side. So, but there's definitely ways of doing it. I mean, we've used darts a lot of times, either in the bust or even in the arm. So often when you have this like oversized sort of boxy arm, sometimes
like the bell jacket.
Yeah, is that has darts in the hem, in the sleeve hem, but even at the elbow point, because often the arm will hang down longer on the inside than the outside because it's this very straight shape. So you can add in a little dart here, and that will raise it up and make it sit slightly differently too. And that's also in the soft blouse. That was a pattern that we really used darts in to sort of show how you can slightly manipulate and change the shape a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I was also thinking as well, like if Nikki is finding that a garment is a bit voluminous and a bit kind of more boxy, even maybe inserting like ties like into the side seams.
Yeah.
You could like either tie at the front or the back or wrap it round just to bring in, just to control the volume a slight bit.
And I mean, actually one example of something you can get pretty fitted is in the book, the wrap top, and that's actually great for a big bust, and that just wraps across and you wrap it around and tie, and so that is an example actually of how you can get a more fitted garment.
Just so I was flicking through the book before we chatted, I was just taking a photo of that to send to my friend Saskia, because we were having a conversation last night online of like what patterns I think we were thinking each other would look good, and I was like, she would look incredible in that.
Actually, that is one of my other favourite pieces in designs in the book as well, I have to say. I really, and in the linen, like it's just so, something about it feels so kind of luxurious and
But you could even make it in something even luxier.
Absolutely, silk or it would be beautiful.
Yeah, could look amazing. Yeah. Okay, so I guess the last question related to your book that I've got is, would you write another one?
I think about this from time to time. No, I definitely would. If the right idea came to me, or if, it was presented as an option, I definitely would consider it. I think I've thought about this a lot, actually, on and off for the last few months, because, if you've written one book and the book goes well, it's possible that you might be asked to do another one. And sometimes I wonder, if I was, what I would do. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'm sure I have another one in me if it were to be the case. But yeah, I think knowing how it went the first time, I think I'll be more prepared. I think the only thing that I found really difficult, I think, of writing the book was more the amount of nights that I ended up having to do. Yeah, a lot of hours spent at home, when the kids were asleep, or even when they're awake and my partner's taking the reins, which he does a lot anyway. So that I found that really hard. And then, it becomes all-consuming, and it's difficult for you to really think or focus on anything else because it's just all you can think about. And my partner calls it being kitchened. He's a chef by trade, and when he used to work in the kitchen all the time and doing these long hours, double shifts, it's just, in Australia it's quite, in Sweden it's a little bit easier, I think, but in Australia it's this very intense job all the time, as I'm sure it is in many countries, and he just couldn't hold conversations with anyone other than the people he worked with, because you just completely deep, when you're so tunnel visioned into what you're doing, you just living that.
I can't talk about anything
exactly. So I felt extremely kitchened for most of the year, but I think if I was to do it a second time, I would just find a way to navigate that so it's not as much of that happening.
Okay. Well, I look forward to it if it happens.
We'll see.
Okay, one more question. So I've seen that as well as writing your lovely book and producing patterns and everything, you've also been making some amazing garments using a lot of vintage linens and things like that. They look so amazing, and I was kind of thinking about, does that then add an extra layer of kind of challenge? Because obviously when you're working with a vintage linen, you've got it's not even on a roll. No. You've got a really set dimension to work with. So how are you doing that? Are you adapting your blocks within what you've got, or are you accepting that it's going to be more minimal waste? How's that going?
Generally speaking, there's very little waste because I try to work within the sizes that we have. So I'll have a base pattern in mind, for example, the cropped shirt, and then I will take the piece that I want as the main part of the fabric, and maybe it's like a tablecloth or something, and often they're square. A lot of these vintage pieces, they're totally square. And actually, they're not too bad in size. They're usually like maybe 120, maybe a little less. This is a very typical example. It's not always, of course, the case. But then I sometimes kind of try and scribble out and figure out, on paper how I'm going to make it work. But say if it's like 120 wide, then I will use that as the total width of my body, and then I'll cut the sleeve from something else, and then I'll cut the neckband from something else, for example. And then when I have pieces left over from those other fabrics I've cut, I'll then incorporate that into the next garment that I make. So
cool.
It's really like there's no kind of one way of doing it. It's very much this sort of process of, just piecing it together and also just allowing it to become what it becomes, because you can easily overthink to where you want everything to go and, which piece to go here and there. So you've got to kind of let the process determine that a little bit as well.
Cool, yeah, because obviously you've got maybe some embroidery or some cut work or something that you want to incorporate as well. And I can imagine you just really, your head's exploding with trying to work out where everything should go.
Exactly. But there's definitely some ways sometimes, and especially sometimes when the edges are really difficult to work with. Sometimes it can kind of stretch out over time, and it's been washed and pressed so many times that they get a little bit wiggly. But I still try and incorporate, even because a lot of these beautiful old tablecloths have this beautiful edging, they have a little bit of embroidery along it or something like that. So you can also incorporate that into the hems and into the sleeves. And I mean, you can kind of use everything if you are making more than one garment. You can find a way, I think, to incorporate everything into it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for this. This has been really fun. Can you remind people where they can find you, where they can get your book?
Yes. So you can find my book by just doing a quick Google search for Zero Waste Patterns book. And it should be available really in most major retailers. And then you can also find more of my work through my website, which is birgittahelmersson.com, and also on Instagram, which is at Birgitta Helmersson. And also, we're in Malmö. We have a little store and studio in Malmö. So if anyone is based in Sweden or in Malmö, then you can also come by and visit us when we're open in the store as well. Yeah.
Amazing. I would love to visit one
should.
day, but it's lovely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Birgitta.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!